How are you?
Hola.
How you doing, Comptroller? Have a seat.
Have a seat and have a mic. We're just getting into this. Scott Stringer, who is the New York City Comptroller, who is, I often refer to him as the adult in the room, and I don't know if that does good for you or harm. It's just the way I feel. You're doing a better job than I anticipated and many others, so welcome again to City and State TV, not knowing what's going to happen. And Michael, I'll let you ask because I got plenty of questions.
You always do.
Oh, yes,
Good to be back.
He always does. Yeah, well, it's great to see you back up here in SOMOS. We saw you a couple months ago at the caucus weekend for the Black and Puerto Rican legislators. You know, you are a former assemblyman, so you are obviously someone who's very interested in what's going on up here.
Tell us what's really going down.
Something's going down.
Yeah, and we're in the midst of the budget season. Obviously, the budget that gets passed up here will have a dramatic impact on New York City. What are you looking for in these last couple weeks? Are you thinking the budget will be on time? Because I know if it's late, that really hurts the New York City lawmakers in the budget process.
Well, the first thing I want to say is that it's time for New York City to get our fair share in its budget. We did an analysis in the Comptroller's office that showed that over the last 5 years, New York City has lost $7.7 billion in aid we should have gotten but never received. The state cut off revenue sharing, didn't give us the $2.6 billion in CFE funding, and that's the state. On the federal side, we've lost $2.3 billion. So our city, which is the economic engine for this country, is down $10 billion, and we need to get our fair share. We have things we got to do in this town. We got to help our kids. We got to reinvest and double down on our education system. This takes resources. And while during our budget presentation, we've certainly said the New York City economy is strong, we also know it changes on a dime after 9/11, after Hurricane Sandy. So we can't simply just lay back and let the state cut us off financially.
What would $10 billion do to the budget right now if we were able to get that? Where would it be spent or misspent? Which is what you're looking at. You have the city's purse, and how would you try to control and more influence that if we were to get it? What would Scott Stringer do?
Well, my priority as Comptroller, as you know, is following the money in the New York City Public Housing Authority. We are at the tipping point in NYCHA. Between the disrepair, the dysfunction, the fact that people in NYCHA are now suffering, even though that housing was developed in LaGuardia's time as the aspirational housing. People start at the bottom, you have an affordable roof over your head, and then you fight to make sure your community is built around NYCHA. We are not investing in NYCHA, federal or state government. So what I would say in this budget process, bring home money to begin fixing the NYCHA Housing Authority.
Do you think there's also a trust issue that taxpayers have with NYCHA because of some of the corruption that you've exposed? Do you think that maybe needs to get fixed first before the money comes, or do you think that's something that just has to happen at the same time?
Michael, that's actually a very good question. I think we have to be on a parallel track. I don't think we punish tenants because of the incompetence at NYCHA, so you fix that problem. You know, one of the things I'm amazed at in my first year as Comptroller, I've audited a lot of agencies. We've taken on City Hall when appropriate, but sometimes audits are not a surprise, right? The audits go back and forth with agencies.
Right.
So when we found that there were 2,800 missing computers at the Department of Education, and we said you should have a way to systematize where those computers are, they agreed. They said, you know, you're right, we need an inventory system. When we go in and audit NYCHA, they're on the defensive. They never say, hey, you know, you have a point here. They just stonewall. They don't want to have the dialogue to make things better. So before you fix a problem, you got to admit there's a problem. And there is a problem. Just ask any tenant in any public housing development.
You know, part of the problem that I have in processing this, and I've seen a few things here and, you know, shifting, but there were 12 years of an alleged good administrator who knew about billions of dollars because in private enterprise he made it. And this is the guy, Michael R. Bloomberg, got into this mess. He had Dennis Walcott in charge of NYCHA for almost 8 years from the mayor's office.
Well, he was Department of Education.
No, but there was a point that his portfolio,
yes.
in Dennis's portfolio, I think it was 7-something years, almost 8 years, and it was coming right directly. The directive was coming from City Hall. So what happened? This is supposed to be the brainiac, the billionaire who knew how to operate money, how to manage, And there's a bigger screw up than ever, because you can't put this under the Blasio administration. You can't blame all this corruption and all this wasteful spending that was ridiculous. It's Michael Bloomberg. There's a name and a last name that you can actually point to, and nobody goes back there.
Listen, when you look at some of the audits that we're doing, clearly we look at the previous administration, we peel back what went wrong back then so we don't make the same mistake now. But I take a view that the past we learn from, but we also have to begin to build a foundation for the future. And it is okay for us Democrats to have ideas on how to fix things and what direction to go in without attacking one another. And I think part of what I've tried to do, and I appreciate the grown-up in the room, Monica, but it really is just saying, look, let's look at the data, let's look at ways to fix this, let's work together, and we're going to try to do that.
How do you do that at NYCHA? Do you still, I mean, my whole thing is that if you haven't proven, and I know you say you move on, you don't punish the victim, you try to do that, but that's, I've heard that before. I think I've been around, and so have you when you were in the legislature. There doesn't seem to be a plan for NYCHA. I don't see it right now coming from this administration. I don't see the understanding up in Albany as to what the real problem is. I don't even see the feds going and cracking down. You know, somebody's got to get accused for this corruption.
Well, here's what I think we should do. NYCHA is it needs such fundamental change. We can't do it the same old way. I believe you've got to bring in housing experts from around the country and build a different kind of structure within NYCHA to expedite repairs, to look at where the systemic problems are, to find out why we haven't collected $700 million in federal money that they left on the table according to our audit. We need to make sure that never happens again. We did another audit and looked at the fuzzy numbers. NYCHA's supposed to hire NYCHA residents. That's how you build economic security, and we found out that lags behind. I've been in places, in public housing developments after the hurricane, where people in the Sandy area who live in NYCHA, they want to build their own community. They want to work building their neighborhood. And where's NYCHA in all this? It's ridiculous.
Let me just ask you one more question on this. Have you sat down with the mayor to discuss this? Because obviously this can't be, you're saying one thing, I really am not clear what, have you actually had a conversation?
We have not yet had that summit on NYCHA, but I'm very open to have it with, the Public Housing Authority. They're obviously not happy with me, because when you speak truth to power, you put information out, some people embrace it, and some people try to sweep it under the rug, so I'm not exactly the favorite one at NYCHA, but that's not my job to be the favorite one. Mine is to put out issues that others can look at and say, hey, maybe they've got a few points.
Clearly, we could talk about NYCHA for another 20 minutes probably, but you also mentioned the Campaign for Fiscal Equity when we were first having that discussion as a clear example of New York City not getting what you say is its fair share as far as money. It seems like that is something that just happens every single year. It's talked about every single year. Do you see any way through this where the financing actually does happen? Is it going to be legal action? Is it going to be the lawsuit?
Look, we estimate that with the surplus that the Attorney General was able to get through these settlements, that if you calculate the strict fair share of what New York City would be out relative to population, we would be at some $2.2 billion. Now, the great thing about we New Yorkers is we know we always give more than we get back. We're cool with that because we think about the whole state. We care about kids in upstate New York, suburbanites, but there has to be some recognition that if we don't build our schools and use every tool financially, then the kids who are at this conference today, the dreamers, the kids who are going to be able to change the world, they're never going to have the resources to do it. And education matters. That's been the theme at SOMOS for me. You talk to people, you talk to the young people who are here, it's all about just give me an education and I'll change the world. And if we can't afford to do that for every child, there's something wrong with that. That's why we need more arts teachers in communities that haven't had the opportunity. Stop using teachers as the whipping post in Albany. Recognize their worth. Invest in teachers and invest in classrooms, and our kids, our diverse kids, will do great.
Your office put out I think it's today. Today it is spring, right? I can't tell by the
spring was yesterday.
We're in Albany.
Is it today?
Oh, it was snowing too this morning when I left, so I had to clean my car off.
The city controller put out a report. Actually, it's explain what you put out, because it's intended for to be able to deal with bilingual, for people who don't speak English fluently, to be able to understand the government. What made you do this? What does it entail? I understand you're going to translate this. It takes them through some of the basic civic things that people should know while living in New York City. And just walk me through that, please.
Well, we've put out our Immigrant Rights and Services Manual. This is something that we actually did when I was borough president. So we look at all the issues facing immigrants and the organizations that work with the immigrant community. And it's a great handbook. It talks about where you can access legal services, health services, from Muni ID to what your rights are in housing. Part of what we're also doing as Comptroller is looking at places like Housing Court that don't have signage, bilingual signage or interpreters. I mean, if we're going to be the city of aspiration and the city of diversity, then we got to start recognizing that we need to get services or get the known services into the hands of people who need those services. So there has to be a connection. So this is my way, using this handbook. We're going to be translating it not only in Spanish, but in Russian, in Chinese, in Korean, in Russian, because that's what this city's about. And we've got to help our immigrant communities that are coming here. They're entitled to services, but they don't have the knowledge about them.
You know,
well, no, I was just going to, on that point, I mean, it seems to me whenever we have this discussion about providing services for non-English speakers, it's always looked at as like, it's something that we have to invest money in to help these people, as opposed to looking at it from the other angle of like, we can essentially learn and better the community through these experiences and we embrace those kind of things too. So I didn't know if there was any sense or any future forward looking as far as like how you would say, instead of like just making sure we provide translators for Korean, maybe making sure like Korean communities are doing the reverse, or they're teaching English speaking people how to speak second languages, fostering them a kind of a larger environment in that type of sense too. It just always seems to me it's like we have to take steps to just help these people when really I think it could be a two-way street a little bit.
That's what it was like growing up in Washington Heights for me, where kids were all equal once we got to the schoolyard. We spoke different languages, we had different cultures. We knew as kids growing up with kids of different cultures and backgrounds, there were two things, you never did. You never messed and said anything bad about someone's mother, right? Mm-hmm. And you respected where people come from. So if you came from Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, if you came from Russia, wherever you came from, the schoolyard was the place the kids learn. I see it with my little babies now. When they go to their daycare, they're with kids of all different backgrounds. In fact, those kids, those 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, they're going to be so far ahead of where we ever thought we could be, because diversity for them is going to be about inclusion, because they're learning that at this great age. So you're right, you build relationships with different communities. What a great way to grow up. But I'll tell you, as Comptroller, I look at everything through what is the fiscal thing, right?
Right.
Suddenly, the world changed. The United States is going to be majority nobody in less than 40 years. The world is now becoming truly global. And guess what ended up happening? Our kids who go to public school, who are sitting next to kids who may come from 200 countries, speak 170 languages, suddenly our kids are the ones the world wants, because our kids are the ones who know everybody. And if we don't harness this economically and we don't promote this, we're fools.
It's interesting you say that, because I was thinking as you were speaking about bilingual education, and we talk about the transition from whatever your origin language is, but we don't speak in the context of public education from grade 1, I mean first grade and through elementary school, to teach other languages. And it's like we're in this bubble, not realizing that the world is changing. And you say in 40 years, United States is not going to be there. And instead of encouraging, well, not only bilingual education and making kids who don't speak English learn English, but rather, how can they learn another language? You have children that are very young. That's the best age to start them.
First grade, I think, is already.
And you're not teaching them Spanish, right?
Oh no! When their grandfather comes over, grandparents, it's grandma and abuelo. No, they know. They say Abba. My kids are fortunate because as somebody who's Puerto Rican and has and I was telling people today. I mean, you'd never know it, but that their grandfather sits down in Spanish 101.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Terrific.
and there's a test afterwards.
So how can people, in other words, you're going to publish this, you're going to translate it to Russian, you said Chinese, and the basic services that are, what else do we need to do from your vantage point in terms of the resources and investment as you see it? Let's look at it from a fiscal point of view. What else is New York right now lagging behind?
One of the issues that we're working on that we're going to continue to speak out on is we're not investing in our women and minority-owned businesses. Now think about this, Gerson. The city spends $18 billion a year. We buy paper clips, yellow pads, we hire law firms, janitorial services. We have 3,800 certified MWBEs. 4% of that $18 billion gets spent with women and minority-owned businesses. So talk is cheap. We should be working and mentoring these businesses because every time we invest, we're actually creating new economic opportunity anywhere from Bed-Stuy to Washington Heights to El Barrio to wherever the community is. But if you are only spending 4% of that money, there's something wrong. So we letter graded 32 agencies. We showed specifically where their money was being spent with African American firms, Latino firms, Asian firms, and we graded those agencies and gave the whole city a D. But I also graded the Comptroller's office, even though we're not covered under Local Law 1. I said, I'm not going to go grade agencies. I want to first see what my house looks like, what I have to do. And we gave the Comptroller's office a C. So I'm not being political, tweaking agencies. I also sit now with our Deputy Diversity Director, Wendy Garcia, our Director, Carol Wiles, because that's the first time the city's had diversity officers. We've appointed them. I said, how do I do this in my office? And it's tough. You've got to build relationships with these small businesses. You got to know the MWB, right? Before, you don't have to, and it shows it's only 4%. So now I'm sitting there around the table saying, well, who do we know? And everyone's like, well, we're going to get back to you. And we have to have this conversation in every agency.
Do you see any progress with that? When are you gonna obviously grade the agencies again, and when is that gonna happen?
We're gonna grade. We're gonna grade every year, and I will tell you that some of the work that we do does get the juices moving at agencies. And I'm not looking to get credit, but I will tell you, with meetings with City Hall and also meetings with different agencies, yes, I believe that there is a move now to make agencies' grades better. And every year you're going to get graded. If you got a D, then go get a C. If you got a C, go get a B. That's what I'm going to try to do. I know it's tough, but think about it. $18 billion, and the best we can do is 4% in the diversity of New York. I mean, what's more important than investing in small businesses? So that's what we're going to be focused on this year again.
Great.
New York City Controller Scott Stringer, good seeing you.
Good to
Best
see you,
of
sir.
luck.
Good to see
Thanks
you.
for coming by.
Thank you
see
for
you.
coming by as always and making yourself
Enjoy
available.
SOMOS.
Enjoy
I will.
SOMOS, and I'll see you at the one of the workshops there.
We'll see you somewhere else.
Definitely. In Puerto
Thank you so
Rico.
much.
Thank you, guys.
In
It'll
Puerto
be
Rico,
warm,
that's
thank
right.
God.